What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the second installment of What If Deku was Aokijis Reincarnation. If you guys go on to enjoy this video or the last one, consider leaving a like button on them as it helps do a ton better in the algorithm. Now, I'm not quite sure how the last video performed, seeing as I'm recording this one about 30 minutes after the last one. So we're kind of just gonna have to hope and bank on the fact that it did good. But for this video in particular, let's set a like goal of 700 likes. Let's see if we can smash that. It's been a while since I've set one of those, so let's just see what happens. But with all that out of the way, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Alright, jumping into part 2, we're going to be picking off right where the story last left off. Now obviously Deku and Bakugo ended up winning that portion of the Heroes versus Villains event, and what would end up happening after this is All Might essentially walking up to Midoriya and pretty much tapping him on the shoulder, asking him if he could actually speak with him privately. Now what would go on to happen here is All Might goes on to pretty much take Izuku to another room, and inside of there he would end up asking Izuku just one question. It's not going to be would you want one for all or anything like that, but it's pretty much just going to be asking him if he was the one responsible for freezing a sludge villain a couple months ago, maybe 10 months ago in a couple weeks. And Izuku's like, oh right, the green guy, right? And All Might's like, yeah, that was you? Izuku's like, yeah, the dude tried to like cover my body and like take me over or something like that. I froze him and I had to go away because, you know, I had to go with my mom. All Might is like, oh, well, that was really all I wanted to know, kid. How long have you been this powerful? Izuku's like, I don't really know. I kind of had a great grasp over my powers from the moment that I ended up realizing I unlocked them. I was about 4 years old. I probably ended up mastering them at the age of 7 and just ended up making some new cool techniques by the age of 10. After that, I just ended up kind of relaxing and just working on my ice powers and speed and physical strength. Just going to the gym every day and working with weighted clothing and stuff like that. You know, basic things. You'd know all about that, right, All Might? And All Might's like, yeah, sure, kid, I guess. Izuku's like, yeah, I spent most of my middle school years inside of you know, martial arts classes and trying to incorporate that into my fighting style, and ended up realizing that that just made me too powerful to even have fun fighting anybody anymore. I think the only person who could generally give me a challenge now would be somebody like you or Endeavor. Endeavor because of his flames, and you because you're just so fast, I don't know if I could freeze you. And All Might is like, oh, well, I appreciate the compliment, young man. From here, he would be like, maybe someday when you are a pro hero, you can face us both at full power. And Izuku would say, sure thing, All Might, as, you know, he ends up walking out. And before walking out, he's like, hold on, one last question. I've noticed that your hero productivity levels have dropped down significantly over the past couple of years. You mind telling me why that is? All Might has a beam of sweat come down his face, and Izuku is like, you can tell me another day, All Might. I'm not gonna pry if it's something you don't want to tell. As he closes the door and he ends up going over towards the direction of his house. Now he makes it there and pretty much just ends up chilling for the entire day. Nothing really interesting does happen there, except for on his way home, Izuku like ends up kind of seeing like a little villain attack and just watching a hero pretty much take care of it. And he's just like, oh, interesting, that's pretty cool. But pretty much after that, he just has dinner and passes out. About a week goes by and eventually they all get permission slips to be pretty much going to the USJ. And during that entire time, Todoroki already developed a huge unliking, a huge disdain of Midoriya. Now, this dislike literally just came from the fact that Izuku beat him and he made him look bad. So Todoroki at this current moment is pretty much just looking forward to the UA Sports Festival so he can establish his dominance. But anybody who realistically has to establish their dominance is not usually a dominant person. You don't say you're going to establish it, you just do with your physical presence. But with Todoroki doing this, you know, he's kind of making himself look like a fool. Anyways, though, what ends up happening here is that we pretty much end up having the entire classroom being in the cafeteria, right? And this is when the Ida big moment would happen, where everybody just picks Ida to be the Clash president because of his willingness to act in face of danger and calm everybody down. So he is made the Classroom president, and eventually we would pretty much just have a mini time skip until all of the students are just on the bus just vibing. Everybody's kind of just chilling and being like, all right, so what's your quirk? Like, who do you guys think is the strongest? And Suyu just blatantly says it. She's like, oh, it's Midoriya. It's Midoriya by a long shot. The next one would probably be Bakugo, but we really don't know how strong he is. And then Todoroki, I don't know, I just really don't like Suyu. I'm sorry, that's why I was doing her voice like that, but I just have a strong like dislike for her. But anyways, so what ends up happening here is that Izuku is pretty much just sitting next to Uraraka at this moment, right? And Izuku is just there, you know, he looks towards Bakugo, he has a smirk on his face, and he's risen Uraraka up, she's blushing all over the place, and Izuku just continues spitting game, right? Kaminari and Mineta are just watching from afar, and they're like, so lucky. And, you know, Izuku just continues spitting his game to Uraraka until eventually they hop out of the bus, and, you know, 13 gives her lame speech. Immediately after this, a villain would show up in the middle of the USJ, and this is going to be Kurogiri, just like always. And what happens here is actually going to be very, very interesting, because it's like, yes, Deku could potentially freeze everything, but that would also freeze his teammates and classmates. And since the door is locked, he can't exactly just like get them out anymore. So what options does he really have? Well, here's one. He immediately looks to Aizawa and asks him if that's a fake villain, and the second that Aizawa nods his head no and gets into serious mode, Izuku knows that now is literally the only time to act. So Izuku pretty much uses his ice lances, and he shoots a ton of like ice at him. Like, he just shoots it at Kurogiri, and Kurogiri is forced to pretty much dodge mid-air and make it so that he doesn't get hit in his vital spot that he only can take damage in. Once Izuku realizes this, he's able to quickly identify the fact that Kurogiri can take damage, just in a very specific spot. And that's something that's very, very intriguing to Izuku. So right as he was about to pretty much do this, Kurogiri was able to actually get the upper hand on him and teleport him straight to the boat area, just like in any other story. And what ends up happening here is Izuku would pretty much begin falling onto the water, but as soon as he sees it, he immediately transforms like everything around him into ice. And all of the villains that were inside of the water just all get frozen. Now, immediately as he does this, he realizes that Mineta and Suyu just barely made it out of the water, and he's like, oh wow, I could have frozen them too, you know, not realizing that they were there with him. He pretty much feels pretty bad about it, but he's like, I'm not gonna say anything. And after this, they walk towards the mainland, only to see Aizawa pretty much having a hard time against some villains. Once Izuku sees this, he immediately realizes that now is the best time to pretty much act. And so he creates a couple of ice clones that go in and do take care of, you know, all of Izuku's dirty work. And as this happens, Shigaraki's scratching his neck, and he's like, oh, sorry guys. You know, okay. Let's pretend, let's go back in time. All right, we're there. And Shigaraki looks at Izuku, right? And then he just like scratches his neck, and he's like, Kurogiri, Nomu, now. And the Nomu gets teleported into the battlefield, leading to Shigaraki screaming, Nomu, kill the brat. And following this altercation, the Nomu immediately blitzes at Deku and just punches a hole straight into the chest of Izuku. Now, Izuku like falls back, and like ice just like stays there onto the ground, and Shigaraki just starts laughing. He's like, yeah, I killed him, right? And Izuku just kind of like is sitting there like pretending to die, as Shigaraki is just looking at the direction of the Nomu, and Izuku just goes over by the Nomu. As the Nomu like walks back towards towards Shigaraki, Izuku freezes the thing. And he does not just freeze like the outside. He freezes the inside of the Nomu. Like the Nomu's blood and like everything that it has inside is completely and utterly frozen. because Izuku could just tell that thing is not alive. And even if it is, it's definitely experiencing a misery of just feeling horrible pain and stuff. So Izuku immediately realizes that, he kind of just has to get rid of it and put the thing out of its misery. So he does so, and then he walks towards Shigaraki's direction, only to pretty much be stopped by Kurogiri, who is pretty much the last line of defense for Shigaraki. But as soon as Izuku sees this, he realizes that he needs to take care of this guy first. So he throws up some leaves into the air, blows cold air, making a saber, and he creates the ice saber, right? And once he does this, he looks at Kurogiri and he blitzes as fast as he can, only to pretty much hit Kurogiri with it with the ice sword, and Kurogiri's little metal part would just get frozen entirely, leading to Izuku looking at Shigaraki, who immediately is like, no, this can't be happening. But he knows he can't fight him close quarters. So Shigaraki begins to try to run away from Izuku, and Izuku just begins to pretty much like walk at Shigaraki. Now Shigaraki makes it towards one of the exits of the USJ that is like all the way in the back where a lot of villains are at, and he begins pushing them out of the way, like, get out of my way. And Izuku's following, freezing up all the villains along the way, and eventually he freezes the door, leading Shigaraki to have to rush at Izuku and try his last thing to actually damage him, which is to just decay Izuku. And Izuku, knowing that he's never been hurt before, is like, whatever, right? And Shigaraki grabs a hold of Izuku's ice arm, and when Izuku feels it, he's like, I don't feel, until he kind of feels a little bit of damage, and it's like, bro, what? Like, his ice decayed kind of, but it's not really what happened. What really happens is that Izuku's ice just pretty much proceeds to turn into water, and that water just hits the ground. And Izuku's kind of shocked because he's taken like physical damage, but nobody's ever just melted him like that before. And it did feel strange, so Izuku doesn't want to feel that again. So Izuku cuts his entire arm off and just regrows it with ice. And following this, he pretty much looks at Shigaraki and he's like, whew, as he blows Shigaraki and just turns him into complete ice, right? Shigaraki is sitting there like a ice statue. And Izuku is just like, all right, that's one villain taken care of. Now to go take care of the rest. And following this, Izuku just goes on to pretty much body everybody who is inside of the USJ, going on to essentially eliminate them as easy as he possibly could. Like, the process is so easy for Izuku that it's just like, bruh, like, it like generally does not get any easier than this, right? And that's just what's really happening right now. But what ends up happening here after this is we basically get a situation where what ends up happening is that okay. I'm confusing myself. Let's backtrack. Izuku just took care of the villains. Everybody's currently getting taken off by the police officers, and Izuku was just sitting back there like, all right, so what do I do? And everybody's just kind of talking about how awesome Izuku was, right? Like, Izuku was the MVP 100%. Nobody else could stand up to him, and it was just incredible. And even when All Might ends up actually arriving, he just kind of tells Izuku that he's very proud of him, and he just thinks about what could have been if he would have given him One for All. Like, if Izuku had One for All for One would be done for, like dunzos. There's nothing All for One could do at that point. But since he hasn't done that quite yet, they still have a bit of a chance for All for One to win. But since Shigaraki and Kurogiri are both going to be in Tartarus, All for One is either A, going to have to launch a full-scale attack on Tartarus to break them out, or B, have to find a brand new successor, which is exactly what I'm going to be leaning towards. I'm going to be saying that he's going to just kind of like say, okay, Shigaraki was clearly failed. He didn't go through with the mission properly, but Kurogiri is a tough loss. But since he can't exactly do that quite yet, he ends up finding somebody else to pretty much mentor, somebody else to align himself with. And while that's happening, all the other students pretty much get a 1 week break off of school to train, but in Izuku's case, just binge YouTube videos. And Izuku would click on one of his favorite videos. He pretty much just clicks on the video that is like Andrew Tate versus Jake Paul face off, right? And he sees that and he's like, oh, that's interesting. But before the video even plays, what ends up happening is he gets hit with an ad and he's like, bro, what's this? But it's just this guy talking about fandom. And he's like, what's fandom? Well, let me tell you. As anime fans, we love to show our support to our favorite shows by rocking anime apparel. But something I'm pretty sure we can all agree on is it's so expensive. So I've partnered up with Fandom to bring you all affordable, high quality anime merch that you are sure to love. And if you use my code Xehther at checkout, you can even get an extra 10% off the already affordable merch. Keep in mind, it does come from overseas sellers, so its sizing is going to be different since it's overseas. That said, let's get back into the video. What do you guys think about that ad transition? Do you guys like it? You guys hate it? What do you think? Nah, but seriously though, jumping back into the story, we cut into the 1 week break currently being over and everybody just being inside of the UA Sports Festival, pretty much getting ready to take place in anything that was really about to happen. Izuku's just doing his best to, you know, like just really kind of stay low key, and everybody else is doing their own thing, just trying to like look intimidating and stuff like that. But Izuku doesn't really care about any of those small factors that come into play. So when it comes to that race, what ends up pretty much happening is that once Todoroki like slams his foot down, right? Like he slams his foot down and turns everything to ice, Izuku is able to like just ignore it. Like ice does not bother him. Izuku is literally ice. So even if Todoroki was to shoot an ice attack at him, Izuku's not gonna feel it, bro. Like he could just merge with the ice, or like, you know what I mean? Like he can't hurt him. He is ice. You can't hurt him. I don't care. Like maybe fire could hurt him, but it's like I don't really think so, because you have to be kind of like of the property to hurt him. I think fire could definitely do a little bit of damage though. So like somebody like Endeavor could probably give Izuku a run for his money, since, you know, obviously Aokiji was fighting Akainu, who, you know, obviously had magma, which is a lot hotter than fire. So I don't know, like maybe not. Maybe Dabi would be like somebody good for Izuku to fight off against, but Dabi doesn't even have the fire control at this point to even face him. So I'm not sure like who would realistically give him battle. Guys, comment down below and let me know what you guys think. Who do you guys think realistically could actually give Deku a real one-on-one like trouble when it comes to a fight? I'm not really sure right now, but I think a fire user maybe. That said, let's get back into the what if. Okay, so Izuku, obviously he does take care of the race, and when it comes to the speech, I know I completely skipped over it, but it's just because I don't really feel like giving a speech right now, and I don't really think that Izuku would really say too much in terms of speech, just because of the person he is and his nonchalant nature. So once he ends up winning the ice race portion, he pretty much just has a little bit of a nonchalant attitude, like just this cool vibe off of him that everybody picks up on, right? And even though he has a huge target on his back, he doesn't care, like not even a little bit. He goes over towards Bakugo and asks him if he's wanting to team up. And Bakugo's like, sure, why not? And, you know, he then walks over towards somebody else, but that's when Mei Hatsume jumps in the way and she's like, hey, can I be on your team? And Izuku's like, sure. And after this, Araka's like, yeah, can I be on your team? And Izuku's like, I was just about to ask you. And, you know, she smirks and, you know, she looks at Mei and she gets a little bit intimidated because it's like another girl's on the team, but it's like, whatever. But regardless of that, what ends up pretty much happening here is that we get a little bit of a scene where, you know, they're all like on top and Izuku's gonna be like the rider, like the guy who's on top of everything. And when this is all happening, we basically end up getting a bit of a strange scene where Izuku essentially just tells the team to chill out, as he creates an ice dome around his entire team. Now this ice dome would be fairly thick. So it's like this like small ice dome that they could still see out of, but like nobody could get to them, if that makes sense. Like nobody could physically get close to them. So they're kind of in a very safe situation as of this moment. And they just pretty much end up passing the cavalry battle because of that. Todoroki decides to fight Izuku in the 1v1 battles instead to show his dominance over him, and so he decides to pretty much go after just headbands. And since Bakugo isn't out in the running, there's really nobody for Izuku to fear when it comes to his defenses. But regardless of that, that ends up pretty much finishing with Izuku keeping the 100 million points and winning, and everybody getting their 1v1 battles just like in the original, which does cue Shinso versus Deku. Now, normally in most of my what ifs where Deku doesn't have one for all or some sort of great mind control and, you know, is in touch with his mind, I usually have it so that Izuku just loses, because like realistically a lot of people would lose to Shinso without knowing his abilities. But Izuku is just so nonchalant, bro. Like he doesn't care. The second that Midnight goes, go, Izuku just looks at Shinso, and because he said some pretty rude things, Izuku pretty much slams his foot on the entire like arena and freezes Shinso in a cube of ice, right? Now, Shinso, once frozen, is just like completely taken out, and everybody begins cheering for Izuku because it's like the dude is a badass. But after that battle, we eventually cue Deku versus Todoroki. Now, this battle is actually going to be kind of interesting because the beginning of the battle would go something like this. Now, Todoroki immediately begins to use a gigantic iceberg, and you know, it's cool and all, but it's like it doesn't do what it was intended to do, right? Because it's like Izuku was there and he just did not care, bro. Like Izuku saw this ice coming at him and he just could not have cared less. Like ice is ice. So what does Izuku do? I know we've never seen Aokiji show the ability of like being able to merge in with ice, so I'm not going to be saying he does that, but pretty much what he does end up doing is creating an ice saber and chopping his way through the ice, making Todoroki be like, what? He survived? And Izuku just kind of being right in front of Todoroki, and you know, him trying to use ice attacks against Izuku, but Izuku would shoot ice attacks right back, and it would be almost as if they're kind of mirroring each other, except Izuku's a lot stronger, so it's not a mirror. It's kind of just like looking at a better version of yourself. And eventually Todoroki's like, I'm sick of this. And you know, he's about to quit, but then Endeavor just goes, Shoto! And you know, a fire is lit under Todoroki. Like, no pun intended. But you know, he eventually is like, whatever. And you know, he shoots his fire out at Izuku and he's like, if I can't beat you with my ice, I'll beat you with my fire. And he shoots a beam of fire straight at Izuku, which kind of does begin to melt the ice. And this is when they kind of begin to like kind of look a little even, but Izuku's ice is just so much colder than Todoroki's fire that he's eventually covered in it, and Todoroki ends up taking the L to Izuku. And you know, everybody's going crazy in the stands. They're like, what? No way! And then the final battle is announced, which is essentially just going to be Bakugo versus Izuku Midoriya. But the second that they step into the stage, Izuku looks at everybody and he just like walks around and he looks at Izuku. And Midnight goes, go! And Bakugo lifts his hand up and Izuku's like, all right, what's he gonna do? But he's just like, I give up. And everybody's like, what? And Bakugo is just like, I give up. And it's just like, everybody's just so shocked. They're like, ain't no way, bro. Like, we paid all this just for this dude to give up. And Izuku just sits there and like, there's just this awkward moment of silence before All Might is just like, well, I guess Izuku Midoriya is the winner.